Second Chances. Chapter 2.
Fleet Captain Joseph Self had been reassigned to become an instructor at the Naval Academy. Consequently, he brought his family to live with him at Annapolis. Although they lived in the naval quarters, Joe's son, John, attended school with the children of the citizens of Annapolis. John was 11 years old and was placed in the 6th grade. John was large for his age, muscular, and robust, so he was not bothered by the school bullies like many other kids. However, because his name was Self, John sat near the back of the classroom. On his left side was a boy named Peter Rogers, and on his right was a girl named Beverly Slater. Peter was small for his age, bookish, shy, thin, and plagued with having to wear very thick glasses. Consequently, Peter was often the object of the school bullies' meanness. Peter was also often the butt of many practical jokes from his classmates. One day during the lunch hour, the school bully, an 8th grader named Charles, but called Tiger by the simpering tagalong that constantly orbited such people, began pushing Peter around, yelling that he was a wimp and a waste of skin. Finally, John had had it. He grabbed the bully by the front of his shirt and slammed him against the cafeteria wall.
Look, Chuck, Peter's my pal, and if you ever touch him again, I'll shove my fist up your nose.
One of the male gym teachers came around the corner about that time, and he started to intervene, but when he saw the whole picture, he backed off. John had Charles by the shirt, pressing his forearm against the bully's throat.
And if I find out you have tried to bully anyone else, you'll get the same fist up your nose. Got it?
Charles could only croak out.
Got it.
John let him go and said,
Get out of my sight. And be scarce when I'm around.
The gym teacher then took hold of John's arm.
Young man, you're going to see the principal, Mr. Robertson.
And with that, he led John off to the principal's office. John stood quietly while the gym teacher told Mr. Robertson what had happened. Then the principal asked,
Well, John, what have you to say for yourself?
No one else would stand up to Chuck, so I did.
I'm going to call your father. Then you'll see what happens to little boys who get into fights.
I don't care what you do. It's too bad when a 6th grader has to do your job and protect those who can't defend themselves. You go ahead and call my dad. I did what was right.
Mr. Robertson was taken aback. No one had ever talked back the way this boy had. He needed time to think about what he would tell Captain Self.
Go back to class. We'll deal with this later.
John walked into the classroom to utter silence. He went back to his seat, and Peter smiled at him. Finally, the teacher said,
Well, Mr. Self, what have you got to say for yourself?
John stood and walked to the front of the classroom, stopped, and turned his back on the teacher to face the class.
I did what no one else in this room had the guts to do.
He turned to the teacher.
Including the teachers. I did what was right, and I'd do it again.
With that, John went and sat in his seat again. The room was silent for a long time, and then Beverly Slater stood up and walked over to Peter's desk.
Peter, I'm sorry I never dared to take your side. If you forgive me, I promise to always stand up for the right.
Peter looked at Beverly, tears welled in his eyes.
I forgive you,
he whispered. When the bell rang, Peter, John, and Beverly walked out of the school 3 abreast, John on one side, Beverly on the other, and Peter in the middle. Everyone in the school watched the 3 very closely. Then, as they approached the bus, a little 5th grader named Elizabeth Grader approached the trio. She said shyly,
Hi, Peter.
And she giggled. On the bus, the 3 took over the back seat, John on one side, Peter in the middle, and Beverly on the other. Peter was the first to get off the bus, but John and Beverly got off with him. Chuck and his minions had been waiting but ran off when they saw the trio get off together. Peter invited the other 2 into his apartment to meet his mother and father. Peter's dad was a city firefighter, and Peter was obviously very proud of him. The 3 explained why they were all there, and Peter's dad offered to give them a ride home. Peter's mom and dad lauded the 3 friends. Then, Peter Rogers, Sr., declared them the 3 Musketeers. This would be what they called themselves from that day on. It grew a little late, so the 3 friends got into the Rogers car and rode to the academy grounds, where John and Beverly got out and walked together to their quarters. Fleet Captain Joseph Self was waiting for his son on the porch of their quarters when he saw John walking toward the house with a young lady. Joe told his son,
John, I want you here, now.
John looked at his dad and answered,
I'll be there as soon as I see Beverly home.
Joe couldn't argue with that. It was one thing he had carefully taught his son, respect and consideration for women. Not that Joe or John was a chauvinist, it was the right thing to do. John and Beverly walked on.
John, your dad is a fleet captain.
Yes, he is.
My dad is a fleet captain too. Well, we are in good company. Did you notice how proud Peter is of his dad?
Yeah, but he has every right to be proud. His dad is a fireman and risks his life every day.
They arrived at her quarters, and he saw her enter, and then he walked back to his dad. Joe Self took John into the house, sat him down, and began to talk to him.
I got a call from your principal this afternoon. Tell me what happened.
John told his dad about Peter and the bully. He described his rage at the meanness and the fact that no one else would help Peter.
Tell me, what did you say to Mr. Robertson to make him as mad as he was?
I told him I was doing his job protecting a kid who couldn't defend himself.
I won't kid you, son. I am proud of you for wanting to defend that little kid. But I think you went about it wrong. Fighting never solves anything.
Well, Dad, I know one thing, Chuck will never bully Peter again. And if he does, he will get this fist up his nose.
Fleet Captain Self was very proud of his son, but he did have to take action. John was seriously grounded for a month. It really bugged John because he was sure he was right. If he ever got the chance, he would also teach that rotten principal a lesson. Fleet Captain Self and Fleet Captain Slater contacted the school board and read the riot act about the abuse of the smaller children by the older, bigger kids and the school administration doing nothing about it. To John's satisfaction, Mr. Robertson was fired, along with the vice principal and several administrative educators who had ignored this abuse, including the gym teacher who had taken John to the principal's office. It didn't take too long for John to realize that there was only one person in school who would be any competition for him, Beverly Slater. At about the same time, Beverly realized that John was her only real competition. So John, Peter, and Beverly became the Three Musketeers, fast friends, but that did not diminish the intense rivalry between the two. Beverly and John competed in athletics, scholastics, and the social realm. If John was captain of the football team, Beverly was captain of the volleyball team. They competed in basketball and baseball and just about everything else. If their class had a president, it was John or Beverly. If John were president, Beverly would be VP. If Beverly was president, John was VP. The Three Musketeers were together from the 6th grade through high school graduation. As seniors, the three participated in Career Day. The day found all three in the room where a naval officer was to give his spiel for the service. As the officer read the names of those attending, he read, Peter Rogers Jr. Peter answered,
Here, sir.
Is Peter Rogers your dad, the fireman that saved all those people in the tenement fire this winter?
Yes, sir.
Peter replied proudly,
He's my dad.
John Self. John answered,
Here, sir.
John, is Fleet Captain Joe Self your dad?
Yes, sir.
Beverly Slater.
Here, sir.
Beverly, is Fleet Captain Slater your dad?
Yes, sir, and Admiral Slater is my granddad.
The officer commented on every name he called. Obviously, he had done his homework and researched everyone in his presentation. The young people were all quite impressed. The roll complete, the officer began his talk, encouraging the young people to seriously consider the system Navy. Then, he told the group that admission to the academy was highly competitive. Several thousand applied every year, but only about 500 were accepted. Out of that, only half would graduate. That settled it for John and Beverly. They were going to apply. Peter wasn't so sure, but after many long talks, the three applied for admission to the academy. At the beginning of their senior year, Peter asked Elizabeth Grader to be his date to the prom. John wouldn't consider asking anyone but Beverly. She was his best friend. John found Beverly in the library studying, so he slipped into the chair next to her. He leaned over.
Beverly?
Yes, John?
She whispered.
Will you go to the senior prom with me?
Why?
You're my best friend. I can't think of anyone I would rather go with. I'm asking in plenty of time. You haven't been asked by anyone else, have you?
No. Well, okay. I'll be your prom date.
Great.
He leaned over and kissed her cheek.
See ya.
At the prom, John was crowned prom king and Beverly prom queen. It was as it should be, as far as John, Peter, and Beverly were concerned. It was well into the last quarter of their senior year when the Three Musketeers found out that all three had been accepted to the academy. They sat outside one sunny afternoon discussing what they thought they would put their minds to in the academy. It was decided by all three to major in command, navigation, and weapons. They thought that would put them on the fast track to becoming captains of their own ships. That thought sobered them. Beverly cried.
If we are all three captains, we will be separated.
John thought a while.
But we won't be captains for a long time. Let's try to stay together until then.
Peter agreed.
Maybe you'll be captain. John and Beverly could be your first officer, and I could be your second officer.
Beverly said.
Well, we will have to stick together just to get through the first year. My dad said he almost quit the academy. If Captain Holoran hadn't come and talked to him, he would have.
John said.
My dad said you can make it if you've got friends to help you when you're down.
The Three Musketeers vowed to always be there for each other. John was the valedictorian at graduation, and Beverly and Peter shared the salutatorian honors. All three friends had graduated with highest honors. The Three Musketeers spent the few weeks of their summer preparing for their days at the academy. The three friends stuck together all during their first year at the academy. Often, at the end of the day, during the last hour before lights out, the three would get together and comfort one another, giving and getting encouragement, bolstering one another, and talking about their plans for the future. They studied together and helped one another. Not that they stopped their friendly competition, but it became secondary to survival. Finally came the day when the senior class graduated. The Three Musketeers stood together and breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Peter cried out.
We made it!
Then he sobered.
John, Beverly, I would never have made it if it hadn't been for you two.
Beverly replied.
Peter, we made it because we stuck together. I would not have made it if it hadn't been for you two guys. And I know John feels the same.
John hugged his two friends.
We made it. Our team made it. I would not have made it except for our evenings together. I had to be there for you like you were there for me.
Peter looked at John.
I love you and Beverly. I probably would have killed myself if you two hadn't been my friends.
The Three Musketeers had achieved much: 4.0 grade averages, athletic excellence, and social acceptance from their fellow midshipmen. John put his arms around the neck of Peter on the left and Beverly on the right and led them to the mess hall. The next day was the beginning of the summer break, and they would part for a few months. They had survived the first year. Of the 523 that had begun the year, their class had dwindled to just over 300. Their days at the academy flew by. Finally, the three were standing with their classmates before the assignments hall. Before the doors opened, the commandant addressed the waiting senior midshipmen. In this hall, you will find every open billet in the system Navy. You will be called into the hall according to your class standing, and you will be privileged to select your own assignment. You can guess that the first midshipman in your class will have all the assignments to select from. The further down in the class standings you are, the fewer billets will be open to you. And so, I call Captain Stewart from Naval Personnel to open your door to opportunity. Captain Stewart opened the doors and announced, "We have 3 midshipmen tied for first place in the class standings. Midshipmen, Rogers, Self, and Slater. You 3 may enter the hall and choose your assignment." The 3 musketeers walked along, looking at the various billets available. Finally, John stopped. The USS Bismarck had 3 openings in the command section. The 3 friends discussed the assignment and then told the petty officer at that table that they wanted the assignments on the Bismarck. They would be together for the foreseeable future. Graduation day, and the 3 musketeers looked out at the assembly of parents and friends. All their parents were present. When John was called to receive his diploma and rank insignia, the commandant called Fleet Captain Joseph Self and his wife to pin on John's stripes. When Beverly was called, her father, Fleet Captain Kevin Slater, and her grandfather, Admiral Sonny Slater, were asked to come and pin on her stripes. Finally, Peter's father, firefighter Peter Rogers, and his wife were called to pin on his stripes. The 3 musketeers smiled with pride when they noticed that they had not been given the stripes of ensigns. They were commissioned as lieutenants junior grade, starting their naval careers ahead of their classmates. And yet, they were greeted by their entire class with applause. That evening, the 3 musketeers were transported to the USS Bismarck. The first officer greeted them, showed them their cabins, and told them when and where to report. They worked and played together as they had since the 6th grade. The Bismarck was in orbit above Earth a year later, and the crew were given shore leave. The three musketeers beamed down to Annapolis to visit old friends and family. Peter disappeared for the weekend. When he showed up again, Elizabeth Grater was with him. Peter had gotten the captain's permission to marry her, and he wanted John and Beverly to stand up with him during the ceremony. The wedding was a small affair, including every member of the Bismarck crew, bride and groom families, John's family, Beverly's family, and a good 2/3 of the Annapolis Fire Department. Needless to say, this was one wedding that filled the social columns of the Annapolis newspapers that Sunday. John, Beverly, Peter, and Elizabeth stayed close friends. Lizzie was becoming the fourth musketeer. Peter and Lizzie often entertained John and Beverly in their cabin aboard the Bismarck. The three young officers continued to excel in everything they set their hands to. They advanced in skill, experience, and rank until it came time for the three to be promoted to commander. The captain of the Bismarck had seen that these three were on the fast track to their own command. He trained all three in every command position aboard, including first officer and even command. The day came when the three musketeers received word that they would be separated. John was assigned as first officer of the Bismarck. Beverly was assigned as the first officer of the USS Valiant, and Peter was given command of the science vessel, the USS Asimov. The four friends sat in Peter's quarters that evening and reminisced, laughed, and wept. Then, finally, it was time for them to part. When they parted, Commander Peter Rogers and his wife left the other two as they transported to the Asimov. It was a small ship, but Peter was her captain and very proud of his first command. The Bismarck and the Valiant were given many exciting assignments. Then, one day, they were assigned to investigate an astronomical phenomenon together, and John and Beverly renewed their friendship. In the meantime, the androids of Beta 3 at Hell System 3 attacked the system. John and Beverly found out many months afterward that Peter's ship, the Asimov, had been destroyed in that encounter. They had taken shore leave together at Naval Base 9 and wept at the loss of the other two musketeers. Their personal grief was profound, and they tried unsuccessfully to comfort each other. Finally, they parted. Both were promoted to captain the ship they called home. They only saw each other again once they were assigned to the USS Constitution.